Hello everyone, welcome to TSAM Digital. My name's Amy and today I'm delighted to be joined by Tatjana Greil Castro, who's co-head of Public Markets, Senior Portfolio Manager at Muzinich Co. So welcome Tatjana, it's great to have you.
Welcome.
Amazing. So to start with, would you mind just telling us a little bit about what you do at your company and give us a little bit of background on your role just so our viewers have a good idea?
Yeah, so I've been at Muzinich now for 15 years. And currently I hold the role of a co-head of public markets, and I'm also a senior portfolio manager here, managing the crossover strategies. That's the focus that I have. And within that, really, we focus on income generation, trying to minimize volatility while churning up the ever important income, especially when, rates are so low. But, clearly also now that income is to be had, it's going to be interesting again. And also there's a big focus on ESG, both with regards to client demand, and that we're trying to satisfy that by offering sensible ESG strategies and working processes and policies around it, but also with regards to engaging with corporates, with the underwriting banks, to really help implement in order to create a sustainable framework, and also to help implement the regulation.
That's fantastic. So you mentioned corporate ESG there, so I'd like to chat a bit more about that then. Could you tell us what growing nature is and how you're engaging with growing nature and how this relates to the taxonomy and corporate ESG?
Yeah, so beyond that, so my day job really is very much focused on doing portfolio management and looking at macro positioning and asset allocation, and as I said, to look at the corporate world of ESG. But there is a big interest of mine that I think very much dovetails into what I do as a day job, and that is when we look at growth. Oftentimes we measure it by GDP, and it is actually now that most people say, well, actually, yes, GDP may be up by 0.2%, but actually I don't feel better. And I think there is an understanding sense of unease that by this focus on GDP, actually the levels of stress and anxieties are going up, and there's a lot of superfluous consumption that comes with that growth. And also by measuring GDP, and this is then as it relates to nature, is that we are only measuring the output, but we are not measuring the efficiency of the input. Actually, if the efficiency of the inputs were improved, my GDP would go down, but clearly, it would be a positive if efficiencies were to go up in terms of the use of resources. And it overstates the profitability, so to speak, because we are not looking at the costs and the destruction that this focus on GDP is creating. And so really, for me, a big topic is that we need to reshift the focus on what we want to grow. And clearly one area to grow would be nature, because it's nature that sustains us. It's the planet that sustains us. It's not the GDP number. And I think that realization is, slowly coming to the fore. And so what I'm working on together, collaborate with a number of peers, is where we go and say, how can we grow nature? And one would be, for instance, by improving soil quality. So that would be to improve the carbon capture of the soil, but also to improve the water retention to prevent flooding, to improve just sort of the nourishment that a soil can provide to the crop. So we need to rely less on fertilizers, which clearly now are getting more and more expensive. And so how do we reduce the input costs and work to help price increases being less strong, and be more efficient. And so growing nature, that is, one area. And then clearly the second stop would be biodiversity, to increase the abundance of species that we have, but also the variety of species to stop the decline of it. And again, it's incremental to our civilization and our well-being to grow that part. And so there has to be a shift in what we are looking at, what we want to grow. And so to the extent that we want to have the overall well-being of human mankind, that is, an area that we need to focus on. And I spend a lot of time on education, but also on implementing those changes.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously, do you think there'll be a way that people will measure, by how nature effective a product is? Because at the moment, as you say, there's these models that people follow when it comes to GDP. But do you think there'll be a way to break from that norm and incorporate this a bit more?
Yes, I'm sure we can measure it. So, we have been very poor in trying to measure it. And so what we can do is that we are baselining. So, that we are making an attempt, that we say, okay, where is our starting point? And so you can baseline, for instance, the soil health. You can baseline, the carbon content of soil, which has depleted since the Industrial Revolution, and the way we are farming, for instance, where we used to have about 30% carbon content in the soil, which has now been depleted to about 3%. Why is that? That is because of all the plowing that we are doing. And with the plowing, you're releasing the carbon. So you have to change into more regenerative farming, where you do nodal drilling, where you plant the seeds without having to turn the soil. So that improves the whole integrity of the soil far more. As I mentioned earlier, it also helps for the soil to be able to absorb heavy rain. And, with climate change, we, expect more of those extreme weather conditions. And so there are ways to measure, first of all, what is the health today? And then if we repeat that exercise, let's say in 2, 3, 5 years time, 10 years time, you can see what improvement you have generated by changing the way we treat the land and we treat nature. And so that is one thing. So you can sort of point to improvements. And I would think you can sell those improvements, because to the extent that some of the corporate initiatives are negative for nature, the same as there's carbon emission and people are buying offsets, where we have broader destruction. And so corporates can then sort of help to offset those destructions by helping in other parts of the world to improve nature and pay for that improvement. That in turn creates an income stream, and that income stream then can be used to create financial assets. And so the broader community can then participate in that growth in nature via financial products. And that's really the idea behind it, that you can have a very inclusive way of growth and a beneficial way of growth. And I think it is also beneficial with regards to not just our physical well-being, but also our mental well-being. Because to some extent, what it does say is that we are meant to be slowing down. And I think, as a human, there is far more a limit in how, for instance, how tall we can grow, or, how heavy we can be. And even the heaviest person in the world, there is a limit, because, otherwise you eat yourself to death. So whereas we have a lot of more abstract virtual criteria, for instance, the monetary system, where we went from millions to billions to trillions, and sort of, they can accelerate, and they can be far more of an outlier. So for instance, the wealthiest person in the world is so much more wealthy than the poorest person in the world. You couldn't have that in terms of a physical appearance, right? You couldn't have somebody be 1 trillion times more wealth or heavier than the normal person, so to speak, right? So there are physical limits. And so our well-being is based around those physical limits. And I think we need to refocus that in order to really enhance the well-being. And when I say that, clearly I talk very much about sort of the developed world, where a certain standard of living has been created, and any drive towards more of that is sort of backfiring. And there has to be a little bit of acknowledgement that less is more. And how do we create that less is more? Is by, as I said, focusing on nature and grow that. And that allows us hopefully also to live our lives a little bit with, with less speed, and we can enjoy it better.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know it's difficult to incorporate some of these quite abstract themes, as you say, into kind of the standard for living and finance especially. But thinking about financial products specifically where you are incorporating it, because I know you specialize in corporate bonds, how does this fit into working with bonds specifically? Do you have kind of new models and way that you're investing sustainably?
Yes, so with corporate bonds, clearly, as I said in the beginning, we're engaging with corporates, but also we see how corporate ESG, and I call it specifically corporate ESG, is evolving. So where corporates have a big desire to reflect, sort of what the population wants, and the population. And generally, I think as society, we have moved away from the very long supply chains. We want to shorten it. We want to know how the product is produced. We would ideally want it to produce closer to home. That there is less of a carbon footprint. There is more of an oversight of, the social aspect of producing certain goods. And so that is changing, and to that extent, corporates are also very keen and understand that there has to be a support of, it has to be, the whole economic system has to be placed on a sustainable footing. And the sustainable footing is getting away from a linear economy that we have pursued over the last 70 years and go back to what we used to do, which is a circular economy. And given that we have a finite amount of resources, we clearly need to use those resources far more efficiently. And so to the extent that we engage in corporates and sort of help with the dialogue also and the narrative being established, they then see the importance of those investments that I just mentioned. And so this is really how the circle closes. And clearly there's a lot of EU regulation that is coming our way or is already in the making or is already being implemented. And that is going exactly along those same lines. And so what we do is that we're offering strategies that are, they have a certain carbon emission exposure, and we have high demands on where and when those funds are reaching net zero and how we get there. We are considering carbon offsets for funds, for instance, so that we can be Paris aligned or even go to net zero over time. So those are the things that we are focusing on. And clearly then, to the extent that the data is getting more available on other aspects like waste, as I said, circular economy, water usage, those sort of things, as the data availability is becoming available, we are also planning on incorporating all those aspects. And to us, that is important. And because that is, as a lender, you always look at the long-term credit worthiness of a corporate. And for us, that is the similar idea as sunk assets. So corporates that are not engaging in thinking along those lines that I just laid out and are not incorporating those changes, in the long run, they will become uninvestable. So we do feel that this is very closely aligned with our fiduciary duty.
Yeah, absolutely. And, hopefully we'll explore corporate investment more at our TSAM ESG conference series. That's something that we've not had much discussion on in our network. So I'm keen to kind of see what's happening with that, because there are a lot of big players out there who are investing in nature-based solutions and investments and different products. So I think there needs to be more discourse on that for sure. And you did touch on the ESG regulation that's coming out as well. And I know recently we've had some updates on SFDR and other regulations in the industry that are shaping ESG right now. So just as closing thoughts, have you got any thoughts on this and what Article 9 is really meaning for fund managers, for example? Because I know there's a lot of definitions coming out from the US, EU and the UK that all kind of have a bit of crossover, but there's a bit of differentiation there as well.
I think regulation and general, public policies are important to help us to make the shift. And so we are supportive of, what the EU and also, going forward, what probably the US is coming out with. And that is an important aspect of making those changes. So in terms of SFDR, clearly there's continued reporting requirements, and those are. I think transparency is important. So that's sort of a part of that. The taxonomy is now more focused on a more limited set, but as laid out just before, that's clearly expected to be broadening. And we are both looking at what is currently already defined, especially in terms of carbon emissions, but also already anticipate the next steps when it comes to the waste and the circular economy and water usage and all those things. So there's that we know is coming. So what we want to do is that corporates start reporting on this more quickly than what they have done so far, and that is a big aspect now, so that we are ready when we have to do our reporting. The numbers are starting to become available. And in terms of Article 9, we do think that this is a high hurdle. Really to go to Article 9, and you really need to show that this is your core focus. ESG or sustainability is your core focus. And so as you can see at the moment, there is not many Article 9 funds. We have one ourselves, and only one so far, because we also take it very seriously, and that is very much focused on carbon emissions. And so I think the hurdle there is quite high, but we are trying to, or we're thinking of ways how we can bring this mindset of Article 9, which is quite rigorous, to bring this in the corporate world, and how we can implement it in a meaningful way. But we are going quite gingerly about it, because it is a big ask to be able to fulfill in a meaningful way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this pans out, and watching what happens in the corporate world, watching what happens with the regulation, and having more discussions at TSAM ESG. So sadly, I know you can't make it to the event itself, but I'm looking forward to having more conversations with you about this. So thanks so much for joining us today.
I hope so. Yeah, do something around the event. Yes, that would be lovely.
Absolutely. Okay, well, it's been great having you today on the channel. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Amy. And thanks everyone for listening and watching.